Have you ever heard the fascinating story of Joseph and Potiphar? For many, Joseph is remembered as the young dreamer who was sold into slavery by his own brothers and later became the governor of Egypt. But there's a part of this story that intrigues scholars, believers, and even curious minds. The episode involving Joseph, Potiphar, and his wife. After all, did Potiphar really change his gender? Does this idea have any basis? Or is it merely a myth fueled by misinterpretations over the centuries? And, most importantly, what does the Bible actually say about this subject? These questions may seem controversial, but they carry profound spiritual lessons. Understanding the truth behind this story not only demystifies popular concepts, but also leads us to reflect on faithfulness, character, and the way God operates in our lives. The text in Genesis 39:2 gives us a crucial clue to understanding this story. The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. This verse not only reveals that God had a plan for Joseph, but also highlights the importance of remaining faithful even amid adverse circumstances. In this video, we'll dive into the scriptures to uncover the details of this story. We'll explore Egyptian culture, the possible origins of this myth, and most importantly, the practical lessons we can apply to our daily lives. Get ready to discover not just the biblical truth, but also how this narrative can transform your spiritual journey today. Before we continue, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any content like this. Also, share in the comments. Have you ever heard about this story? What intrigues you the most about the relationship between Joseph and Potiphar? To understand this intriguing story involving Joseph and Potiphar, we need to start with the basics. Who was Potiphar? The Bible introduces him in Genesis 39:1, where he is described as an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard. Although these descriptions are brief, they give us important clues about his prominent position in Egypt. Potiphar's role in Egyptian society. Potiphar was no ordinary man. He was one of the most powerful military leaders in Egypt, responsible for Pharaoh's personal security and for strategic matters related to the kingdom's defense. The term captain of the guard, also translated as chief jailer, suggests that he held a role similar to that of a minister of defense or a national security chief in modern times. The name Potiphar means he whom Ra gave or dedicated to Ra, referring to the Egyptian sun god. This reflects not only his political position, but also his involvement in Egypt's religious system, where officials often aligned their lives with the gods they worshipped. As a high-ranking officer, Potiphar was wealthy, influential, and had authority over many lives, including that of Joseph, a young Hebrew slave. Historical curiosity. In ancient Egypt, social status was often demonstrated through clothing and accessories. As a high-ranking official of Pharaoh, Potiphar likely wore fine linen garments and gold jewelry, symbols of his privileged position. This starkly contrasted with young Joseph, who arrived as a humble slave. This difference makes the story even more striking. Egyptian society and its customs. The Egypt of Joseph's time was an opulent and highly religious civilization. The Egyptians believed their gods controlled every aspect of life, from fertility to warfare, and they performed various rituals to honor them. Cultural and religious practices also included elements that might seem strange to us today, such as the use of enchantments and dream interpretation, something that would later play a crucial role in Joseph's life. However, some cultural aspects led to misinterpretations about Potiphar. In ancient societies, it was not uncommon for certain royal officials to be eunuchs, castrated men, to prevent romantic or dynastic issues in the court. This idea led some scholars to speculate that Potiphar could have been a eunuch. However, the biblical text offers no direct evidence to support this theory, especially considering that Potiphar was married. Reflection. Could Egypt's cultural complexity have influenced how Potiphar and his wife acted in Joseph's story? Understanding the historical context helps us avoid simplistic judgments and appreciate the depth of this narrative. Potiphar's wife, a bold woman, Another central point of this story is the role of Potiphar's wife. Although her name is not mentioned, she's described as a woman of great influence but questionable morals. Her persistent attempts to seduce Joseph and her false accusations raise intriguing questions about her relationship with Potiphar. Why was she so bold? Could there have been tensions or issues in their marriage, or was this simply a reflection of her character? These questions have led to various interpretations over the centuries, including theories suggesting that their marriage was dysfunctional. However, the Bible does not delve into the marital dynamics of Potiphar and his wife, leaving us only with conjectures. Biblical curiosity. This wasn't the only time a biblical figure dealt with similar temptations. Joseph's story and Potiphar's house echoes other narratives such as David and Bathsheba, reminding us that the human heart is constantly tested. By exploring who Potiphar was and the historical context in which he lived, we see that he was a man of great importance, deeply embedded in Egyptian culture. However, he was also part of a society full of beliefs and practices that may have influenced how his story was interpreted. Now that we know more about Potiphar and his position in society, let's dive into the next topic: what really happened, the biblical account of Potiphar and Joseph. Now that we understand who Potiphar was and the historical context in which he lived, let's delve into the biblical narrative to uncover what really happened between Joseph, Potiphar, and his wife. Genesis 39 presents this story as one of faithfulness to God, unshakable character, and even injustice, but one that ultimately fulfills a great purpose. 1. Joseph arrives at Potiphar's house. After being sold into slavery by his own brothers, Joseph was taken to Egypt, where he was purchased by Potiphar, one of the most powerful men in the country. Genesis 39:1. Despite being in an unfamiliar land and facing a humiliating situation, the Bible provides an inspiring message. The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. Genesis 39:2. Joseph's faithfulness to God and his excellence in his work caught Potiphar's attention, and he entrusted Joseph with a great responsibility. Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Genesis 39:6. This detail is highly significant. As a slave, Joseph wasn't merely a common servant. He became the steward of Potiphar's entire household, a rare position for a foreigner. This demonstrates how God's presence in Joseph's life caused him to prosper, even in the most difficult circumstances. Practical reflection. Have you ever felt out of place or undervalued somewhere? Remember Joseph, God can use any circumstance to bless you and ensure your faithfulness is recognized. Potiphar's wife and the temptation. Everything seemed to be going well for Joseph, but then the story took a dramatic turn. The Bible describes Joseph as well-built and handsome, Genesis 39:6, which caught the attention of Potiphar's wife. She tried to seduce him directly, saying, "Come to bed with me," Genesis 39:7. However, Joseph firmly refused, showing remarkable spiritual maturity. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? Genesis 39:9. Notice that Joseph didn't see this situation merely as a moral failure against Potiphar, but primarily as a sin against God. He understood that his faithfulness to the Lord was more important than anything else, but Potiphar's wife didn't give up. Day after day, she tried to tempt Joseph, but he remained steadfast in his faith. In one final attempt, she grabbed Joseph by his cloak, but he fled, leaving the cloak in her hands. Genesis 39:12. This act teaches us something powerful. Don't negotiate with sin. When faced with temptation, the best choice is to completely walk or run away without hesitation. Practical reflection. Is there something in your life today that is testing your faithfulness to God? Like Joseph, are you willing to make firm decisions to protect your relationship with the Lord? The false accusation and Potiphar's anger, rejected and humiliated, Potiphar's wife decided to take revenge. She screamed, accusing Joseph of trying to assault her, and used his cloak as evidence to support her lie. "This Hebrew slave you brought us has come to make sport of me." Genesis 39:14. When Potiphar heard the accusation, he became angry and sent Joseph to prison. But here's something curious. If Joseph were truly guilty, the punishment likely would have been death, especially considering Potiphar's status. The fact that Joseph was sent to prison suggests that Potiphar might have doubted his wife's story or recognized Joseph's integrity. Reflection. Sometimes the truth may not be immediately acknowledged, but God always knows our hearts and will reward our faithfulness in due time. God uses the prison for his purpose. Even though he was unjustly imprisoned, Joseph once again prospered because God was with him. The Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. Genesis 39:21. What seemed like the lowest point of Joseph's life became the place where God began preparing him for a greater purpose, to become Egypt's governor and save many lives. What appeared to be a defeat was, in reality, part of God's plan to exalt Joseph at the right moment. Message to the audience. Are you facing injustices or trials today? Trust that God is with you, just as he was with Joseph. What seems like an obstacle could be exactly what God uses to take you to the next level in his plan. From the biblical account, we see that this story isn't about rumors or speculation. It's about how faithfulness to God can sustain us through life's temptations and injustices. But where did the myth that Potiphar changed his gender or had unusual characteristics come from? In the next topic, we'll uncover where did the myth that Potiphar changed his gender come from? Now that we've explored the historical context and the biblical account of Joseph and Potiphar, an intriguing question arises. Where did the rumor come from that Potiphar might have changed his gender or possessed unusual characteristics? Although the Bible does not mention anything of the sort, certain Jewish traditions, apocryphal texts, and modern interpretations have helped fuel this myth over the centuries. Let's clarify this issue in an objective and biblical manner. The origin of the confusion, rabbinical interpretations. One of the possible sources of this myth comes from ancient rabbinical interpretations, such as those found in the Talmud. Some rabbis sought to fill gaps in the biblical text with complementary explanation, and one of these involved the Hebrew term saris, used to describe Potiphar in Genesis 39:1. The word saris can be translated as official or eunuch, depending on the context. Based on this ambiguity, some interpreters speculated that Potiphar might have been a eunuch, a man who had been castrated. However, this idea is inconsistent with the fact that Potiphar was married, something extremely rare among eunuchs at the time. Clear conclusion. In Potiphar's case, the biblical context clearly identifies him as a high-ranking military officer, not a eunuch. The idea that he had some unusual physical condition finds no support in the scriptures. The role of apocryphal texts, ancient writings that are not part of the biblical canon, also contributed to the development of alternative ideas about Potiphar. Some of these texts suggested that Potiphar struggled with issues of masculinity, which supposedly led his wife to seek attention from other men. These interpretations, however, are purely speculative and lack biblical foundation. They reflect human attempts to explain details not mentioned in the Bible, rather than divinely inspired truths. Practical reflection. As Christians, we must always remember that the Bible is sufficient, and we don't need to rely on external texts to find spiritual truths. Modern sensationalism. In modern times, the myth gained traction through sensationalist interpretations. Some contemporary commentators revisited this story in an effort to connect Potiphar's narrative to current debates about gender identity. However, these interpretations completely ignore the historical context and the spiritual purpose of the biblical narrative. The Bible is clear. Potiphar was a married official, and the focus of this story is Joseph's faithfulness and how God sustained him, not speculation about Potiphar's personal characteristics. Why do these myths persist? So why do these Ideas continue to be discussed. There are a few reasons. Human curiosity. When the Bible doesn't provide all the details, people tend to fill in the gaps with assumptions. Potiphar's wife's behavior, her persistence in trying to seduce Joseph, raises questions about their marriage, opening the door to alternative interpretations. Sensationalism. Shocking narratives often attract attention, even when they lack biblical support. 5. The biblical reality. The truth is that the Bible does not concern itself with Potiphar's personal details. The purpose of this narrative is to highlight the faith, character, and obedience of Joseph, who remained steadfast despite temptations, injustices, and false accusations. Final message: we should not be distracted by speculation or myths. The focus is on Joseph's faithfulness and God's sovereign plan, which turns adverse circumstances into opportunities to fulfill his purposes. In the next topic, we'll explore the spiritual lessons from this story, applying them to our daily lives. The story of Joseph in Potiphar's house is much more than a tale of temptation and injustice. It is filled with spiritual lessons that help us understand how God uses even the most challenging situations to shape us and fulfill his purposes. Let's explore the key lessons from this narrative and how they can transform our lives. Faithfulness to God is more important than anything else. One of the most striking lessons from this story is Joseph's unwavering faithfulness to God. Even in a situation where he could have easily given in to temptation or justified his actions by his circumstances, far from his family and under great pressure, Joseph chose to honor God above all else. When Potiphar's wife tried to seduce him, Joseph responded decisively, "How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" Genesis 39:9. This verse shows that Joseph viewed his decisions not merely as ethical or moral choices, but as spiritual ones involving his relationship with God. He understood that yielding to sin would be an offense to the Lord, regardless of the consequences. Practical reflection. How often are we tempted to compromise our values in difficult situations? Joseph's example challenges us to prioritize our faithfulness to God, even when it seems costly or unpopular. Flee from temptation. Don't negotiate with sin. Another powerful aspect of Joseph's story is how he dealt with temptation. He didn't try to argue or negotiate with sin. When Potiphar's wife grabbed him, Joseph ran, literally leaving his cloak behind to escape. Genesis 39:12. This action teaches us a crucial principle. The best way to resist sin is often to remove ourselves from the situation entirely. Remaining in a compromising environment can lead to failure. Joseph knew this and chose to protect his integrity and his relationship with God. Action step. Is there an area in your life where you're negotiating with sin? It could be a toxic relationship, a harmful habit, or even thoughts that don't please God. Joseph's example encourages us to be firm and make radical decisions to stay faithful to the Lord. Injustice can be part of God's plan. Even after resisting sin and doing what was right, Joseph was falsely accused and sent to prison. For many, this would have been the perfect moment to question God or feel abandoned. However, Joseph remained faithful, and the text makes it clear the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. Genesis 39:21. This lesson is powerful. The injustices we face can be tools God uses to shape our character and prepare us for something greater. For Joseph, prison became the stepping stone to becoming the governor of Egypt and fulfilling his divine purpose. Practical reflection. Have you ever felt like you were being punished for doing the right thing? Trust that God is in control. He can transform even the most difficult circumstances into blessings, just as he did for Joseph. Character is shaped in moments of testing. Joseph's character was tested repeatedly, whether through his work as a slave, the temptation he faced, or his time in prison. In all these situations, he demonstrated integrity, patience, and obedience to God. This story reminds us that character is forged during difficult moments. God uses life's trials to shape us and prepare us for his purposes. Joseph didn't know it at the time, but God was using every hardship to train him as a leader, administrator, and faithful servant. Reflection question: what challenges are you facing today? Can you see them as opportunities to grow spiritually? Ask God to help you strengthen your character through these trials. God honors those who are faithful to him. The story of Joseph shows us that faithfulness to God is never in vain. Despite being sold into slavery, falsely accused and imprisoned, Joseph was ultimately exalted by God at the right time. He became governor of Egypt and was used by God to save countless lives, including his own family. Message to the audience: even if the reward for your faithfulness doesn't come immediately, trust that it will come in God's perfect timing. Continue to trust in his plan, knowing that he is working for your good. The story of Joseph is a powerful testimony that God never abandons us, even in the most challenging situations. His faithfulness and character were used not only to change his own life, but to impact the destiny of an entire nation. In the next and final topic, we'll tie all these lessons together and discover how this story can transform your life today. We've reached the end of this journey through the incredible story of Joseph and Potiphar. More than just an ancient tale, this narrative is a true spiritual guide filled with lessons about character, faithfulness, and God's sovereignty. Now it's time to tie all these lessons together and bring them into our practical everyday lives. Faithfulness will always be rewarded. Joseph remained faithful to God in every circumstance. As a slave, in the face of temptation, and even in prison, he faced betrayal, lies, and injustice, but he never compromised his values or his relationship with the Lord. Even though it seemed like his faithfulness was not being recognized, God was working behind the scenes. The result was extraordinary. Joseph went from being a slave to a governor, used by God to save Egypt and his own family from famine. Practical message: maybe you're going through a moment where you feel undervalued or even forgotten. But Joseph's story reminds us that faithfulness to God is never in vain. Trust in God's timing, for he always honors those who remain steadfast in their covenant with him. 2. Flee temptation and protect your relationship with God. Joseph's attitude in dealing with temptation is one of the most practical lessons from this story. He didn't hesitate or linger, he simply ran away. This radical decision shows us the importance of distancing ourselves from anything that can compromise our relationship with God. Action step: reflect on your life today. Is there something that's pulling you away from God? It could be a habit, a relationship, or even thoughts that you know don't align with his will. Like Joseph, take firm steps to protect your walk with God and guard your heart. 3. Trials shape our character. The hardships Joseph faced were not in vain. Every stage of suffering, from the pit where his brothers threw him to the prison in Egypt, was used by God to mold his character and prepare him for a greater purpose. Message to the audience: are you going through trials today? Remember that God can use every challenge to prepare you for something greater. Don't give up, because he is building in you the character necessary to fulfill his plan for your life. 4. God is always present. Even in difficult moments, one of the most comforting aspects of Joseph's story is that in every moment, whether in the pit, as a slave, in prison, or eventually in the palace, God was with him. The Bible says, the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. Genesis 39:2. This reminds us that we are never alone. Even when circumstances seem difficult or unjust, God is working to turn our story into a testimony of victory. Encouraging verse: but those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. Isaiah 40:31. 5. God has a purpose for you in the end. We understand that everything Joseph went through had a divine purpose. God used him not only to save his family, but also to preserve an entire nation during a time of famine. This reminds us that even in moments of pain and uncertainty, God has a greater plan than we can imagine. Practical reflection: can you see how God is working in your life today? Ask him for discernment and strength to trust his plans even when they aren't clear. If this story touched your heart, Don't keep it to yourself. Share in the comments. Which of these lessons impacted you the most? And don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. May Joseph's faithfulness inspire you to remain steadfast in your walk with God, knowing that He is with you every step of the way. The story of Joseph shows us that God is sovereign and faithful. He never abandons us, even in the most challenging moments. Just as Joseph was exalted at the right time, trust that God has a special purpose for your life. Thank you so much for watching this video to the end. May God bless you and your family. And remember, those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. Isaiah 40:31. See you in the next video.